Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 5th of April. I'm Amir Shamir, and this is IBA News, broadcasting live from Jerusalem. Less than a week after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed he would create a new settlement in the West Bank aimed at housing the families evacuated from the Omona outpost, it appears they are facing further delays. This time, Eyal Toledano, the Justice Ministry's legal advisor to Judea and Samaria, has expressed his opposition to approving a necessary injunction required in order to set up temporary living quarters on the new site for the settlement called Geulat Zion of northeast Ramallah. Residents said they don't believe the Prime Minister will allow it to happen, especially after the cabinet approved Netanyahu's decision. They said failure to move forward and establish a new community is a slap in the face to the families and the entire government. Jordan's King Abdullah is set to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump in the White House today in what is viewed as a new effort by the Arab world to show the U.S. it is united in a push for peace in the Middle East. The king's visit comes at a time when hope is growing that a regional solution can settle the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and amidst reports that the U.S. president plans to host a peace summit later this summer. Upon his arrival yesterday, the Jordanian king met with U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and the two held a working lunch meeting. According to reports, the two discussed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the situation in Syria, and fighting the Islamic State. The United Nations Security Council is set to hold an emergency meeting today to discuss the deadly chemical weapons attack on Syrian civilians in the Idlib province. We would like to advise you that you may find some of the images in this report by IBA's Margot Dudkevich disturbing.
The attack in the Idlib province led to harsh condemnation across the globe, with the United States, Britain, Israel and other countries blaming the Syrian government for the deaths of more than 150 civilians, including women and children. World powers proposed a UN Security Council resolution be put to the vote, condemning the Syrian regime.
When I saw the images of babies suffocating from a chemical attack in Syria, I was shocked and outraged. There's no excuse whatsoever for the deliberate attack on civilians and on children, especially with cruel and outlawed chemical weapons. I call on the international community to fulfill its obligation from 2013 to fully and finally remove these horrible weapons from Syria.
We condemn the use of chemical weapons in all circumstances. If proven, this will be further evidence of the barbarism of the Syrian regime. Now, the UK has led international efforts to call to account the Syrian regime and Daesh for the use of chemical weapons, and I would urge the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to investigate this incident as soon as possible.
The deadly attack also left more than 200 civilians injured when Syrian or Russian planes reportedly released a toxic gas on the rebel-held town. The horrific images broadcasted across the globe showed civilians collapsing, vomiting and foaming at the mouth, being brought to a local hospital which was bombed later in the day. Others were seen walking in the streets holding their loved ones who had died, and the bodies of men, women and children strewn in the streets. While the White House blamed the attack on the Syrian regime, it also took former President Barack Obama to task, saying yesterday's incident was a direct consequence of the former president's failed policy when in 2012 he vowed to establish a red line against the use of chemical weapons in Syria, but did nothing.
Today's chemical attack in Syria against innocent people, including women and children, is reprehensible and cannot be ignored by the civilized world. These heinous actions by the Bashar al-Assad regime are a consequence of the past administration's weakness and irresolution.
At the UN headquarters in New York, the spokesman for the Secretary General warned if the reports are verified, it would constitute a serious violation of international law.
We're not currently in a position to verify the reports. I saw that earlier today. The OPCW fact-finding mission has already announced that it's begun gathering information to attempt to confirm that chemical weapons were used. Obviously, any sort of report of use of chemical weapons, especially on civilians, is extremely alarming and disturbing.
Presiding as president of the UN Security Council during the month of April, U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley announced an emergency meeting would be convened later today.
We have all seen the reports of the terrible chemical weapons attack in Syria. I'd like to inform the Council that the Presidency intends to convene a meeting in briefing format here in the open chamber to discuss the attack.
While officials in Damascus denied the accusations, Russia's defense ministry issued a statement today accusing Syria, saying regime planes hit a warehouse containing chemical weapons that is controlled by rebel forces. Yesterday's attack may finally force the world to hold the Syrian regime accountable, demanding it provide details of the locations of its chemical stockpiles and allow access to international monitoring missions. Since the start of the civil war in Syria 6 years ago, more than 450,000 people have been killed and close to 5 million Syrians have fled the country. Margo Dudkevich, IBA News.
The struggle of the Israel Broadcasting Authority workers continues. Yesterday, IBA protesters attended the Labor Party's Passover toasting, during which they called on Knesset members to become more involved in the broadcasting dispute and assist in preventing 1,000 workers from being sent home. Party Chairman Yitzhak Herzog and Knesset members Hilik Bar and Amir Peretz vowed to assist IBA workers in their plight. Meanwhile, on April 19th, the Knesset is expected to vote over the controversial draft agreement regarding the fate of public broadcasting reached by Prime Minister Netanyahu and Finance Minister Kachlon last week. The deal concerning IBA and the Israel Broadcasting Corporation, known as the Ta'agid, calls to set up an independent broadcasting authority for news and current events that will be broadcast on Channel 1 and Israel Radio and operate under the IPBC. Meanwhile, the High Court of Justice is examining 2 petitions submitted by the Journalists Association and Labor Party MK Eldad Yaniv against the deal. The Jewish Agency has recently appointed Dr. David Breakstone as its deputy chairman. He's the first American-born immigrant to fill this illustrious position, and he spoke with IBA's R.A. O'Sullivan.
Dr. David Breakstone is stepping into a pretty illustrious position in Israel, particularly for someone born and bred in New York City. He's just been elected as the deputy chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel. An educator connected with the Masorti or conservative movement, Breakstone is the first American Olay or immigrant to take this senior post.
When I first walked into the office of the Shaliach Aliyah from the Jewish Agency 44 years ago in Boston, I never could have dreamed or imagined that I would have reached this position. So yes, I would say I'm an example of a successful Olay. I hope my being here will also serve as an inspiration to other Olim that glass ceilings aside, there are ways to reach the top.
Breakstone is the deputy to Natan Sharansky, and like Sharansky, he believes that his role in the Jewish Agency is to serve as a voice for the diaspora Jewry to the Israeli government.
I think that's a big part of my job here also in the work in the Jewish Agency, helping those in the diaspora develop their own personal relationship to the Jewish state, so that at the end of the Seder, when they say next year in Jerusalem, even if they have no intention of getting here, that they will think through what their connection is to the Jewish state and the land of Israel.
There seems to be a growing rift between the diaspora Jewry and Israel. Well, how is the Jewish Agency going to deal with this?
We're very, very involved in that on a number of different spheres. First of all, we have some 20,000 young people from around the world now participating every year in a variety of Israel experiences. And there's no question in my mind that the best way of connecting people is to bring them here. But we're also well aware 20,000 is only it's a very important number, but it's a small percentage of everybody that could be coming. So we've initiated a number of new programs in the last few years, which have become incredibly successful. We now have close to 150 Israeli high school graduates serving as informal Jewish educators in schools, in synagogues, in Jewish community centers around the world.
How do you think Israelis view the Jewish Agency?
I think the more they become aware of what we are doing, the more they understand just how relevant it is. We are reaching out to populations that the government, for all sorts of reasons, is not able to, and sometimes hand in hand with the government, in being able to provide. We have a Youth Futures program. We have Potchim Atid, opening the future. So there's a big emphasis as well on impacting directly on Israeli society. The Jewish Agency directly assists those who are impacting on Israeli society, particularly in the areas of pluralism. There are special funds that go to the Reform, Conservative, Masorti, and Orthodox streams, programs that are specifically and intentionally directed at exposing Israelis, again, to the entire rainbow of Jewish life.
Well, you're stepping into some pretty illustrious shoes. How do you feel about it?
For me, being in this position and coming from the background that I do, it's all of that comes together in terms of my appreciating the responsibilities that I've now taken upon myself, and it's with a great deal of anticipation and a bit of trepidation, I would say, that I walk into those shoes, as you say.
Well, I have to say you have the best English of anyone who's ever had this position.
A 23-year-old Palestinian member of Hamas from the West Bank city of Qalqilia, who underwent military training in Syria and plotted attacks inside Israel, has been arrested. Details released by the Shin Bet security agency today revealed that Malek Youssef Kasmar, who was detained on February 17th before he could carry out deadly attacks, was recruited by Hamas abroad and instructed to enlist operatives to carry out attacks in Israel. Kasmar lived in Cyprus and Turkey and was recruited to the organization while visiting Jordan 2 years ago. He was sent to Syria to undergo military training and met with Hamas operatives in Turkey before he returned to the West Bank and was arrested. He was indicted in Samaria military court last week on charges of endangering state security. The Committee for Examining Government Appointments has rejected the appointment of Yair Shamir as the chairman of the state-owned Israel Aerospace Industries. The main reason for the rejection of Shamir, who is the son of former Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, is the conflict of interests. Shamir is a former Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, representing Yisrael Beitenu, which is headed by Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who appointed Shamir to the post at IAI. The committee also rejected Shamir because he was part of a U.S.-based company trying to purchase drones from the IAI. Defense Minister Lieberman is not backing down, and his office put out a statement saying that Yair Shamir is the most suitable and worthy candidate for the job. We believe the committee's decision is questionable and mistaken, the statement said. Before getting into politics, Yair Shamir, a former senior Air Force officer, had already served as chairman of the IAI. A 65-year-old female pedestrian was killed in Kfar Saba when a tree fell on an electric pole, hitting her this morning. Magen David Adom and rescue units arrived at the site and evacuated the woman, who was unconscious and suffering from a severe head injury, to the Meir Hospital. Shortly after her arrival, doctors pronounced her dead. The city later removed the tree, and the electricity company began fixing the power lines that led to an outage for a number of hours. Local residents say they have warned the municipality a number of times that trees, some of them more than 60 years old, with roots protruding from the ground, are a public hazard. Just days before the Passover holiday, the Workers' Committee of the Parks and Nature Authority is threatening to go on strike due to the failure to resolve a long-running labor dispute with its management. The management has turned to the labor court with a request to prevent the strike during the week-long holiday. If the issues are not worked out, then all national parks and nature preserves, as well as lifeguard stations, will be on strike during the Passover holiday. When do Israeli politics and American pop music mix? When Britney Spears performs. She's slated to rock the crowds this summer at Tel Aviv's Yarkon Park on July 3rd, her first performance in the country. Well, it turns out that the Labor Party had scheduled primaries for its leader on the same day. After a meeting with their party election committee, it was decided to postpone their elections until the following day. The reason given was that they had concerns they would not be able to hire enough guards for their election booths on the day that the world-famous pop star would be singing her hits in Tel Aviv, including her smash hit, Oops, I Did It Again. In local money matters, shares were up on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange while the shekel was mixed in foreign currency trading. Here are the numbers. Turning to the forecast, the IBA weather team says tonight will be partly cloudy with a chance of mist along the coast. Tomorrow will be mostly clear with unseasonably high temperatures in most regions. Here's a look at the highs and lows for the next 24 hours at home and abroad. That's all for this newscast. Join us again tomorrow, same time, same channel. Until then, I'm Yael Shir, wishing you a good evening and shalom from Jerusalem.